Hello and welcome to Ofofo Studio. I have with me Anter Virk, CEO and co-founder of Subconscious Compute. I met Anter when I was in Thai in 2014 for the first time. Um, Subconscious Compute is his second startup, first in cybersecurity. Welcome to the studio, Anter.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Anter, I know you from your first startup, Shotang,
Right.
but not many of us know what you've done before that.
Sure.
How did you start your career? How did you end up being in cybersecurity now?
Sure. It's a little tricky journey to be honest. So I started my career with Proctor and Gamble Singapore.
Mhm.
So I was briefly with them, uh, and while I was there, I kind of made this bold decision to come back to India very soon after I was there. Uh, Primarily for two reasons. One, that was my first time out of the country, so I guess it's fair to say that I didn't take it well. And second, India was turning out to be a great story. So what I could kind of foresee was that the economy India will have in a few decades, and the opportunities India will have in a few decades will kind of far exceed kind of being anywhere else in the world. So I kind of took the bold call to come back to India, join Nokia out of campus through my placements, and then I was with them for about 4.5 years. Kind of covered the length and breadth of the country with them in first in my sales stint and then later in the marketing stint. But by the time I think I was kind of entrenched into my marketing stint, I realized that there was a lot of merit in starting by
Mm.
myself. In fact, back in Ahmedabad itself, that itch was already there. But what I felt was that it's too early to start right out of campus. So in late 2012, I had a few colleagues who kind of were thinking of the same thing.
Mm.
So then I guess one thing kind of led to the other. Early 2013, we quit our jobs and we started then what the company was called Channelist, which later became Shotang. So then obviously, I mean, we started as a platform for connecting distributors to brands, more like a channel partner search platform, which later metamorphosed into full blown and basically B2B e-commerce engine, so to say, right? So it kind of moved from one thing to the other. And then back in 2019, late 2019, early 20, when I was kind of looking to do another startup. So apart from a lot of learnings which we kind of picked up from Shotang, one of the bigger learnings was, at least for me and my personal leadership style, I kind of felt that I don't really enjoy on very operationally intensive projects, right? So for me personally, it becomes a little challenging to manage teams beyond 300, 400 people. So one of the primary drivers of kind of when I was picking the next idea was that how can I make sure that we create ton of value by by kind of assembling and combining only a handful of people. So that was one of the primary criteria, and one of the things which kind of fits this criteria beautifully was that can you do something deep tech.
Deep tech.
So while we were kind of researching, I met my co-founder during back that time in 2020, who was doing like a very fundamental research into brain and computer architecture. So one cybersecurity kind of came into existence because it was a good use case for that tech.
Hmm.
So let's kind of say it that way. Yeah.
Super. So you met Antar through. How did you meet? So how did you met? You met Dilavar through. How did you meet your co-founder Dilavar?
So basically, back in 2020, when I was kind of looking to start my next venture, so one of my investors in my earlier venture kind of pointed me to this incubator called Entrepreneur First.
Okay.
So when I kind of had a conversation with them, so they got me into this cohort which they were about to run. And my co-founder Dilawar was also incidentally part of that cohort. So, and the design of the cohort was largely that they facilitated a lot of conversations between the people who kind of came in, and they kind of ensure that there are people from the business background and there are people from the technical background. So when I met Dilawar, uh, uh, so largely the conversations was around basically the research which he was doing, right? So, and as I said, I mean, he was working on the brain and computer architecture kind of problems. I found it very fascinating, right? So, and when we kind of dug deeper, we realized that okay, there could be a lot of potential use cases which could be born out of this technology, right? So we decided to team up, and then it was not an easy journey to even kind of stumble onto the right use case with the technology as well. I mean, we took easily more than 9 to 12 months, I would say. That was the time horizon in which we kind of figure out where we want to put this tech, how do we really want to utilize this tech, right? But good thing was that while we were kind of doing that, there was, I mean, unlike other ways in which where you kind of find a co-founder first and then delve into an idea, and then by that time you're already kind of joined at the hip, that because you're kind of starting together, you have to stay together. So for us, it was the other way around. We started basis an idea, and during that journey we kind of realized that okay, this is something which we can kind of turn into a meaningful business, and second, we are good as a team, right? So then we decided to kind of pair up and put that case forward to the entrepreneur first team, saying that okay, this is what we want to do. And the good thing about the program was they kind of fund you right at the idea stage, right? So they give you some money to kind of build the idea out. So we kind of crossed that stage, and by the time we were kind of ready for our next fundraise, we had already kind of solved a lot of the problem, basically around what use cases to go after, what to solve first, what to solve later.
Interesting. So, what use cases do you solve at the moment? Like, what does subconscious compute do,
Sure.
and what are the prominent use cases you are actually looking at?
Sure. So subconscious compute, if you essentially ask me, I mean, at the heart, subconscious compute is basically an edge AI company, right? So what we do is basically we build, uh, uh, we have built basically a neural net, which we internally call habituation neural fabric, right? And this fabric is very revolutionary in the sense that, uh, because when you look at edge use cases, right, what are the primary challenges, right? So from an AI perspective, the primary challenges, edges is where the data is getting created or consumed, right? So there is a flood of data which comes your way, right? Now, principally, if you look at it, right, the cost of computing a pixel, right, or processing a pixel is much lower than cost of transporting a pixel, right? So the challenge is with all the cloud architecture as the main architecture. So what you end up doing is basically you pick up the data from the edge and you take it to the cloud. And no, it adds two problems. Right? One, as I said, the cost of moving the pixel anyway is higher, so your compute is lost. And second is every time you move a pixel, you have this delta time which gets added with the latency which kind of builds up, right? So so when you do this, you can have like a very powerful model in the cloud, but you are killed by the latency, or you're killed by the cost which that model basically comes at, right? And the thing is, cost you can maybe still bear, but there will be a lot of sensitive use cases on the edge which will not be able to bear that latency, right? So for example, if you have a connected car tomorrow which is autonomous, you can't even like afford the asset being compromised even for 5 minutes, right? So what we felt was that you needed something which is very powerful on the edge, so hence we built this fabric, where we are saying, one, now essentially if you're building the fabric on the edge, this fabric should be able to take in all the data instantaneously, right? Because you don't have the leeway to basically store it anywhere, because otherwise you will run into the same problems. So but you don't really want to either compress it or sample the data, because then you will lose the essence of the data, right? So this fabric kind of helps us process a lot of data, digest a lot of data in real time, but don't waste a ton of compute on it, because edges don't really have that kind of resources, right? So that is one. But the thing is this: see, anybody can kind of take in a lot of data, but how do you know, and how can you quickly look at anomalies in that data, right? So that is what this fabric is really adept at, right? And then once you have picked up an anomaly from that data, then all that remains is basically how do you process that anomaly, right? So you can run uh, like a little bit of AI on the edge itself. Let's say something like TinyML, where you can actually put this against some patterns and see what kind of classification do you get from those patterns, right? So essentially, we have this AI which runs on a very limited compute, limited resources, and it can very quickly tell you where do you want to pay the attention, right? So because I mean, it's like, I mean, a very good analogy could be basically, if you have a haystack, right, you don't know where the needle is. So subcom essentially has the fabric which can very quickly point out, saying that this is the section where the needle is likely to be, right? So once you have that and you have kind of not wasted a ton of resources in doing that, everything else is like not that big a compute, right?
Right.
So that's essentially what the underlying technology that subcom has, right? Now, what kind of use cases can you build on top of this? Any use case where there is a lot of data and you don't know within that data where you should look at, right, can be solved by this, right? Now, so the problem could be you could have a data lake, and you want to build, let's say, a search engine on top of it. You can build with this technology, right? Or essentially problems where there is a flood of data which you have to deal with, but the meaningful data in that, let's say, flood of data is limited. So
Yeah.
so think cybersecurity, right? Now you will have events like every instant, right? But not all the events are meaningful, right? So you have to pick up only those events which are actually meaningful. Now, these may not be threats, right? But at least these will be meaningful events which when analyzed could turn out to be threats. But what you don't want to do is basically miss any threat, right?
Got it.
So essentially, because you will do that if you actually sample it, right? So that exactly is the essence. So right now, use cases that we are building is essentially we are focusing on cybersecurity as of now, and because it's an edge model, right, we are focusing on devices.
Yeah.
So and what has happened in the last decade or so, because we wanted quick rollouts, what has happened is basically the world has moved to this agentless
Yeah.
architecture a lot, right?
Yeah.
So it was good as long as, let's say, you're protecting laptops and mobile phones. But when I look at the use cases of tomorrow, let's look at autonomous vehicles, autonomous drones, robotics, right? You will not be able to kind of live on second-hand telemetry where your analysis is happening on the cloud, but you don't have any information on device states. For example, even if you when you look at, let's say, zero trust, right? Uh, you can't really live on a fact that you authenticate a device right at the start of a session,
Yeah.
and throughout the session the device trust is unknown,
Yeah.
right? And you can't check the device trust unless and until you have something on the device. So we are kind of bridging that gap, essentially, where we're saying
Interesting.
every device state at every instant will be known.
It's a lot of technical terms there.
Right,
I
right.
understood this,
Yeah.
but
Hmm.
can I say edge is the toughest thing, and you're giving eyes and an ability to basically uh, sort of providing an utility to process the cyber data of the
Right,
edges?
right. So
Because the challenge I see is majority of the edge security today is either EDRs or XDRs,
right,
which predominantly work on computers that have at least 4 gigabytes of RAM.
right,
Right?
right,
Even if you go to any vendor who's selling EDR, they ask you where I have to sort of put these. The moment you say they're laptops with 1 GB or 2 GB of RAM,
hmm.
they'll be like, maybe it's not good
Right,
enough to
right,
protect.
right,
From there, you're talking about an extreme case where you have edges as IoT devices, cars, etc.,
hmm.
where the computing power is extremely low.
Right,
Right? And then on top of the existing computing power, you're giving a fabric that actually allows them to see what's going on in the data, and you're
right,
helping them to find a needle in the haystack.
right, right.
That's super interesting.
Right. So,
Okay.
so to give you like some numbers, for example, if you're running an antivirus scan on your system,
Hmm.
that agent will take anywhere between 20 to 25% of your CPU per scan.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, and all they're doing is basically just kind of looking at a certain file against a certain footprint,
Yeah.
or a pattern, right?
Yeah.
Whereas when you run Shepherd, I mean, you're running a fabric which, and the resource cost it has is barely like 2 to 3% of CPU at max, right? So it's fundamentally very different ball game, and so yeah, that was, and what we are essentially saying is that even if when you talk about EDRs and XDRs, so you're essentially combining a lot of data from different resources, and then you're kind of coming into an intelligence which is basically cloud based, right? So what we're saying is, that's all fine if you have that kind of luxury, first of all, to have that kind of resources on your devices, and then you have maturity or size of that state where you can have, let's say, a big security team inside.
Yeah.
Then you can also have multiple number of tools on your devices and cloud, to kind of, let's say, triangulate data and then bring it to a like certain point, right? But for everyone else who either have time sensitive mission critical use cases
Yeah.
where you basically can't afford latency, or even, let's say, 1 second of delay, then you need to have something on the device. or for an enterprise use case, let's say where you don't have security teams inside, or you don't have the luxury to put four different systems on your or tools on your laptop, then essentially you can have this one platform which will actually take care of your devices, security wise as well as management wise.
Got it. So the shepherd is a form of a fabric you
Right,
provide,
right.
right? And you also talked about being agentless and the world
Hmm.
coming back to the
Right, right,
agent-based
right, right,
workflows
right,
for
right,
edges, especially
right,
the
right,
edges that are low computing in
right,
nature.
right.
So what's shepherd, and what are you
Sure.
guys? What kind of cybersecurity problems are you solving using this
Sh-
fabric?
Sure, sure. So Shepherd is essentially our endpoint security tool, or platform, right? So what Shepherd consists of is basically an agent which rests on the device. And good thing about Shepherd is that it's very, very lightweight.
Mm,
And it is not only lightweight in terms of its resource footprint or its own footprint, but it's also very light on the resources.
mm,
So the kind of RAM it consumes, the kind of CPU it consumes is very, very light. I mean, we are running it on ESP32,
mm.
which is like the bare minimum you need to do any controller computation, right? So that is the agent, and then it's kind of coupled to a platform where you can actually see everything, right? Or manage the agent from, right? Now, what this agent does is basically, on the first layer, the agent picks up very deep observability into the machine, right? So because it's sitting on the kernel,
Mm,
it's kind of pretty much privy to the to every process which is running on the machine, right? So it gives you, let's say, observability which is way deeper than any agentless infra can pick, right? And then once you have this observability, you have basically control on each of the device states at every instant, right? Then what we do, basically the other benefit of having an agent is that you not only observe, but you can also enforce the desired states, right? So from the observability, if you notice, let's say, that there is something off in a particular machine, because so your objective of securing the machines is basically twofold, right? The first objective is you want your machine to be in a state or a posture which is actually the recommended posture for that machine, right?
mm, mm,
So in that case, what Shepherd does is basically, first it gives you observability in terms of what your posture is,
mm.
right? And then second, it gives you flexibility to enforce policies which will bring it to the desired posture,
Got
right?
it.
So that piece Shepherd solves, right? The second piece is basically when you are under attack, right? How is your posture faring, right? And what are the pieces which you can basically, what are the things which Shepherd can tell you which will actually help you mitigate an attack, right? So that is the piece where the fabric comes into play, where we detect something which is out of the ordinary,
Mm,
then Shepherd kind of picks it up, and then it analyzes, and if it looks suspicious, I mean, if it's a threat which is a known threat we already know, then Shepherd can actually isolate or terminate it right there and then. But if it is something fishy, but we haven't seen that threat before, more like in a 0-day case, right? Then we basically send an alert back and saying that, okay, what do you really want to do with this process, right? So it kind of solves both the problems as far as machines are concerned.
So you're bringing in observability and controls and patch management in a simple fabric.
Right. So the idea is not only to give you observability and policy enforcement, we actually want to build compliances on top of it,
Mhm.
because one of the challenges with compliances is people can tell you that, okay, your devices be in this state, but how do you enforce that state,
Yeah.
right? So because Shepherd is a kernel agent, we can not only tell you how compliant your device is, we can also enforce that compliance on the device, right?
Mm.
Then the other tricky topic is vulnerability management, right? So you can pick up vulnerabilities and see what applications are installed and how vulnerable they are. But the other challenge is, how do you really sort them? How do you patch them? Right. So Shepherd can actually, I mean, the way we are building is we will not only be able to pick up vulnerabilities on these machines, we will also know what kind of, let's say, permissions those applications have on these machines, and then we will be able to sort these vulnerabilities in the order where they need to be patched, right?
Right.
And then Shepherd will be also able to run the patches on these machines, so that so what we are essentially saying is that that complex process hopefully will be broken down into just like one click enforcement, right?
So basically, you're launching a edge
Right,
that can do all things related to cybersecurity with
right,
the help of observability.
right, right.
That's
So
amazing.
the mission
So
is basically to give you one product that can solve all your endpoint management and security woes.
So it's very common, right? When you're explaining this, this looks more like a newer version of Edge when it comes to newer version of EDR when it comes to
Hmm.
laptops and
Hmm. Hmm.
uh,
Hmm.
expensive devices, right?
Hmm.
But how is it your IP that you build this to work on smaller devices? Is it the fabric that can work on any small device? Because whatever you said, right, be the compliances of it, be
Hmm.
the patching, vulnerability management, identifying, detecting the vulnerabilities, etc., etc. Everybody has a particular learning curve and maturity
Hmm.
in the laptops and high computing
Right.
devices,
Right.
but everybody has neglected the real edges, which
Right.
are a lot of
Right. Right.
IoT devices and smaller devices,
Right.
right? So you're saying that Fabric can help tap into those smaller devices and make the rest of the ocean secure.
Right. So let me kind of take a step back, right?
Yeah.
So Shepard, when you look at it, right, or the habituation neural fabric, which is the essence of all of everything we are kind of building around that,
Hmm.
right? So I'll tell you why we feel it's like absolutely revolutionary,
Yeah.
right? So when you look at intelligence and as a concept, right, and what we are kind of little saddened by was that the way artificial intelligence has kind of taken up a certain shape,
Hmm.
which even though we call it intelligence is not intelligent, right?
Yeah.
Because ultimately it's just like data on steroids, right?
Yeah.
So so what we felt was that when you are building an intelligence, you have to actually take a lot of cue from the nature,
Yeah.
right? And how intelligence is built in nature, right?
Yeah.
No, natural intelligence is built in a different way, right? So the first thing which natural intelligence has is that more often than not, uh, your system's perception is not based on a single modality,
Hmm.
right? So your sensors or sensory organs, right, no matter what kind of species you deal with, very likely will be more than one, right? So for
Yeah.
us, we have five, right?
Yeah.
So your intelligence is essentially a lot of sensory data or sensory organs which are kind of feeding into your central unit,
Hmm.
uh, and and the central unit kind of is very effortless in composing all of this,
Yeah.
right? So for example, when we make a decision about what we are seeing or what we are hearing, or what do we make of a physical space, we kind of usher in data from all the senses,
Yeah.
whatever senses could be actually used in that
Yeah.
scenario, right?
It could be
So
vision. It could be.
yes. So for
Yeah.
example, if I say, okay, what you're looking at is coffee or not, you will see that, okay, it's black, right? But you can also smell the coffee, which
Yeah.
kind of
You have
gives
variety
you
of
gives
parameters. Yeah.
exactly, which gives
Yeah.
you a decision in like two computes, right?
Yeah.
So so that's one. Second is natural intelligence is local,
Hmm.
right? You don't have a cloud,
Yeah.
right? You just have a 20-watt system which does everything, right?
Yeah.
So but the good thing about natural intelligence is that that's scalable, right? So because I mean, a very rough approximation is that our species intelligence is directly proportional to the number of neurons,
Hmm.
right? We are most intelligent species because we have the most number of neurons, right?
Hmm.
So and you can kind of go down, but the good thing is that even species with hundreds of neurons, not even thousands, are intelligent,
Yeah.
right? To the extent. Now if you draw this corollary to devices, right, so what we're essentially saying is that every device that's internet connected, because non-internet connected devices barely need any protection,
Yeah.
right? So every device that is internet connected has some amount of resource, right? And we can very loosely say that the amount of threat on the device is also directly proportional to the resources,
Yeah.
because the resources will define what the capability of the device is, and the capability will define what kind of threat it will experience,
Fair enough.
right?
Yeah.
So it's directly proportional that
Hmm.
way. So what we now need to do is, can we have a paradigm, right, which can scale up and down basis the resources, right, and lend security to that those devices. So that is where this habituation neural fabric gets very interesting. So here we don't unlike other AI modules, we don't really have like a big model which we need to train and then truncate for the edge. We actually train this model on the edge itself, right? So it doesn't really need any training whatsoever. So basically, we deploy this model depending on the kind of resources these devices have, and then it learns the patterns in terms of sequences on the machine in some time, and then from there on, the model is adept at picking whatever is out of the ordinary, and then from there on the entire cycle starts, right? So it's very adaptive that way, right? So the model itself. So now The security is kind of built on which is directly proportional to the amount of threat which these devices will experience, right? So that way it's very scalable.
Interesting, man. So, Antar, you have raised a couple of rounds already. Like
Yeah.
you said, entrepreneur first gave you some starting help,
Right.
right? How was your and Showtime also you have raised some seed fund
Yeah, we
before.
went on to Series A and
Yeah,
we were very
yeah,
close to raising Series B. Yeah.
yeah. So, tell us about your journey in fundraising. Like, what helped you, and what was the game plan you had, and how did you execute it? And you are also raising one more round now. I think
Right.
you have a
Right.
early success as a deep
Right.
tech company with a couple of customers too, right?
Right. Right.
So
Right.
how did it happen? Like, how did you raise money so quickly, being in India, being a
Hmm.
deep tech company?
Sure. So I guess, yeah. So to be honest, I think there is no magic formula to it.
Hmm.
Uh, and you're right. Being a deep tech company in India, it's very hard to raise.
Yeah,
I'm not saying that anybody else has like very easy to raise money. It's usually takes ton of effort, and a lot of times it becomes like a full time job of a founder.
yeah,
So I think what kind of helped in our case was that one, we were very certain in terms of what kind of company we are building.
mm,
So we were kind of right off the block telling everybody that this is a deep tech idea. The reason for doing that is deep tech has higher gestation, right? So unlike let's say an application company, you can't really produce something in 3 months and start testing with the customer, right? So the base fabric took us more than a year to build, right?
right.
And for that 1 year, we were just kind of dabbling, thinking that okay, what kind of use cases we will build on top of that. But thankfully, because use cases did not dictate the baseline fabric, so our baseline fabric kind of developed it at its own pace, right? So yeah, so coming back, so basically, one, because you know that there is enough gestation in the idea by being deep tech itself. Even though there are handful of VCs in India who kind of understand deep tech that ways,
Yeah,
but thankfully there are some now, right? So we knew what kind of VCs to kind of reach out to, right? The other thing that helped was, so we were kind of introduced to a mentor as part of EF itself,
mm,
so who kind of also basically gave us few introductions to the right set of VCs. So those conversations kind of were very warm conversation. And in fundraising, I think you also know that warm conversations are kind of having
yeah,
much better than having like
yeah,
cold emails and cold calls that way, right? So so just knowing that what kind of VCs we want to talk to, and being clear upfront that this is high gestation idea, and we need. And the other thing is was that we were not really chasing ton of cash,
yeah,
right? Because I think one of the other mistakes which we as founders tend to do is that we try to get the company valued at a certain point way too earlier in the journey,
yeah,
right? So what I have kind of learned from my experience is it doesn't really matter if you're kind of, let's say, valued a few million lower or a few million higher, right?
mm,
Because at this point nobody's getting an exit,
yeah,
right? So early seed funds is, I would I would any day give 5% more equity to the right VC
yeah,
versus getting, let's say, higher value and then struggling with the partner, right?
yeah.
So we kind of zero down on the certain VCs whom we wanted to kind of have conversations with, and thankfully things kind of turned out well. So at least for this organization, we didn't really faced a ton of hardship in kind of raising our seed round that ways.
And who did you raise it from?
We raised it from Yonest.
All right.
Yeah, Yonest and a clutch of angel investors and syndicates.
Nice.
And obviously, Entrepreneur First also participated in the round, with
Right,
them being our previous VC.
right. And who you talked about edges, right? Like
Right,
I'm assuming your ideal customer would have either a lot of edges or substantial amount of data on the edges, right?
right,
Either of these two.
right, right,
So if you have to pick an industry or if you have to pick an ideal customer, who would that be for you?
right. So,
And
so
which, like, you can tell us like which geography, which industry,
right,
like imagine an ideal customer and tell me so that
sure, sure.
anyone who's seeing can get some idea out of it.
Sure. So essentially, if you look at it, right, so the way we are building Shepherd as a platform is, as we were discussing initially, right? So the technology is super powerful as the devices get smaller,
Hmm.
right? But what we realize is that the fabric is also very powerful uh, basically irrespective of the kind of device we are putting it on, right? So while we were building for the IoT, right? So there's, as I said, there's a certain gestation before you kind of manifest the technology into a use case, right?
Yeah.
While we were building this, what we realize is that when we look at even enterprise endpoints as a market, right? Uh, Enterprise endpoint is also very interesting, right? So on one end you have, let's say, Fortune 500s of the world, which is using, let's say, what, 45 to 50 cybersecurity products.
Yeah.
There you have CrowdStrikes of the world and Palo Altos of the world, right?
Yeah.
Where you have a team of people who's handling it. There are complicated tools. They are kind of flooded with alerts every day, and then they're kind of managing it somehow.
Yeah.
But you need a ton of resources to manage these kind of tools, and of course they're expensive.
Yeah.
On the other end is basically these small teams or medium scale teams who don't even have cybersecurity teams, let
Yeah.
alone anything else, right? So, and they, for the endpoint, they are basically uh, there's nothing much, to be honest. Either you are kind of stuck into antiviruses, which don't really solve your problem, right? Because antivirus is just a file system tool which is about 40% effective. I mean, there's no way they're going to kind of thwart sophisticated attacks of today, right? And then in the middle, basically, there are largely mobile device management companies, right? So what we kind of felt is that there is this big horizon or big bucket of the market which is struggling because there is no comprehensive tool which can solve more than one problem for them. And these guys don't have internal cybersecurity teams which could actually deal with three tools.
Yeah.
Right. And second, let's be fair, they don't want to spend ton of money on different tools, right?
True.
Because there is a limited budget, right?
Yeah.
The other thing what we kind of realize is that the cybersecurity journey also is very typical, right? You don't start cybersecurity journey by understanding or by realizing that, okay, I'm under attack, I could be attacked, my reputation could be lost, my business could be lost, and hence I need to protect. Usually you come into the market or you start your journey because you have to be compliant.
Yeah.
Right. So compliances also become like the mainstay, or essentially the entry into the market is compliances, and then
Yeah.
you basically kind of mature from there, right? So what we felt was that as far as enterprises is concerned, there is a huge opportunity to kind of build this one endpoint security slash management platform, which could essentially be the single platform that could give you everything you need for the endpoint security, right? While we are building for the IoT. So essentially for us, then the markets become two, right?
Yeah.
So one is this enterprise security where we are saying you can have this one tool and we will be able to solve most of your problems with that, right? And the second part is IoT space, where we are saying as long as you have small form factor devices or mission critical use case devices, we will be able to give you the first line of defense, right? So we are saying, we are not denying the fact that, okay, you still would need, let's say, cloud intelligence, you still would need more sophisticated tools at the back. But what we are saying is you don't have to get all your devices infected before you solve them, right? Because cybersecurity has remediation problem, right?
Yeah.
You always want to remediate. I mean, we are saying, why not prevent, right?
Yeah.
So the first line of defense we are building, then everything else can be built by somebody else. So now what kind of markets and what kind of customers? uh, Markets, to be honest, cybersecurity has this one blessing because there is no cultural context or nuance to
Correct.
cybersecurity, right? There is no geographical limitation. A device under threat here is a same as device under threat in America.
Yeah.
So geographically, we are not thinking by limiting ourselves to a particular country or geography. uh, Now, as far as use cases are concerned, on the enterprise case, we wanted to work with first the companies who, as you rightly said, either have sensitive data on their edges and hence they need to protect their edge devices, right? Or they have a lot of devices which they are finding it hard to manage, right? So typical customers would be like, let's say, fintech companies, right, or health tech companies, who would have sensitive data or at least have a lot of devices to manage.
Yeah, with DPDP Act, I think there is a
Exactly.
huge
Right.
need for
Right.
protecting the
Right.
edge
Right.
devices, because
Right.
majority of the private, if you look at a fintech,
Right.
when they do the KYC,
Right.
all the agents have all our data,
Right.
right? So, Antar, if somebody want to use Shaped or subconscious compute, how do they reach out to you?
So you can reach out to me at antar@shepherd.watch, or you can directly log on to shepherd.watch and get started there.
All right, Antar, thank you for dropping by and taking your time out and talking about some subconscious compute.
No,
Uh,
thank you. Thank you so
all
much
the
for
best,
having
and I
me.
hope you become the biggest deep tech company in cybersecurity from India.
Thank you so much for those wishes, and thank you for having me here. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
All right.